Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. We talk with professionals who work across the span of content strategy, from small businesses to big enterprises, from content design to content marketing, from solo consultancies to huge agencies. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 45 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I'm really happy today to have with us Laura Robertson. Laura is a content strategist and co-founder at Contentious, an agency in London. And I met her at Confab a few weeks ago, and she did a lightning talk about CMSs, and there's maybe a little bit of room for improvement there. And so that's why I invited Laura on the show. So welcome, Laura. You want to tell the folks a little bit more about yourself and what you're up to?
Thanks so much, Larry. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I guess I'm over here in London, have been running Contentious for almost 3 years now, and we do content strategy work with mostly non-profits and campaigners. So looking at how those organizations can use content to achieve their goals, which are often about inspiring support and changing people's minds. It's really, really interesting, really rewarding, very lucky to have some super clients doing really great work around the world. We met at Confab, which was the first time I'd been over for that conference. And I was very pleased to be able to give my lightning talk.
Yeah, and that talk was extremely well received. I saw a lot of heads nodding in the audience as you spoke about, and I don't want to dwell on this too long because I want to be kind of solutions oriented here, but there is kind of a few problems with the current slate of CMSs that we have to choose from. Oh, and just on the off chance that somebody's listening to just know what a CMS is, content management system. That's kind of the typical way that enterprises of all sizes manage the stuff the online content that they publish and share. Tell me a little bit about your kind of, not to recap the whole talk, but just a couple of the top level points about where there's room for improvement.
Right. Okay. So, I think the first thing to mention, I guess, would be that in my lightning talk, I asked the Confab audience of 750-ish content specialists if anyone loved their content management system, and only one person put their hand up.
And that was Greg Dunlap.
That was Greg Dunlap, who has got interesting things to say about this topic also. I'd asked the same question at a website meetup in London, and nobody had raised their hand, and that just that strikes me as a really sad state of affairs. I guess there are a few things about the traditional CMS that I think are not working as well as they could be, maybe. And that's because these systems were designed for publishing to websites and for creating web pages, which at the time was great, but it's 2019 now, and that's no longer really the brief. We're having to develop content to go to lots of different platforms. We've got voice to think about now, and social media and emails and apps and all of these different ways of delivering content to our audiences. So it's kind of the wrong paradigm, I guess. And a lot of them have also been developed kind of technology first, as opposed to content first. They're trying to do quite different things, I guess. They've got these two jobs. So they have to take care of all the technical stuff of running a website and manage the content. And the technical, I think, often supersedes just because of the way the internet evolved. And then what that creates, I find, is these kind of systems-led attitudes where people see content as an add-on to a technical discipline as opposed to a kind of strategic specialist activity. which is then not conducive to getting content the kind of the investment and the love that it really needs to thrive.
Exactly. And how many different CMSs have you tried? Like, what's your sample size?
Ooh,
Yeah.
my number. So I have worked with, probably 5 to 10, I guess, different systems, and then also kind of different versions of the same system. So a few, and obviously there are lots and lots out there. But yeah, I've worked with some of the big ones. I've worked with some smaller, less well-known ones that have been developed by smaller organisations. So a bit of a range in there, and yeah, I think I kind of find, I find these common issues across the board, and in the content culture of the organizations that are using these different systems.
Yeah, no, that's what's in this. Well, this is now episode 45. The thing that comes up over and over again in all these interviews is that content strategy is mostly about people and the helping them do stuff. And technology is, there's the whole. Well, what's interesting too is that the whole discipline of UX has kind of grown up alongside of content strategy, and the two are commingled in a lot of ways. And you would hope that at this point, with all that emphasis on human-centered design and user experience and customer experience and all these things, that the technology would have caught up. But it seems like we're mostly dealing with sort of evolution of existing platforms instead of. Do you think we need to just start from scratch?
Oh, yeah. Good question. But yeah, I think that's such a good point, that it is about the people. And I suppose, yeah, one of the things that you find with these traditional content management systems is that things like the sort of the internal user experience, I guess, is not necessarily considered. So you've got these content people who are trying to do their best work, but the editorial interface is maybe not especially friendly. The whole authoring experience is not a good one. And yeah, kind of putting things like workflow and governance kind of into practice using these systems is quite difficult. And yeah, I think there are some different approaches, I guess, in terms of what we do about this. And I think the thing to say is that I do not have a simple answer. It's there's no easy fix, because it's not just a technical issue. It's also kind of it's cultural, and a lot of this stuff is quite ingrained. But I think starting from scratch is potentially a good option. You can customize, right? You can take an existing system, and you can there are lots of things that you can do to improve that system, to make it more fit for purpose, to make that authoring experience a better one. There are all kinds of features that you can add, but I still don't really know any content people who choose to work in the CMS when they're creating and editing and kind of managing their content.
Right, that's such a common thing to have your workflow. A lot of it's happening in Google Docs or Word or with Markdown or something, and then you dump it into the CMS. Where wouldn't it be a lot better to have a CMS that actually supported? And a lot of them claim they do. Like, for example, Greg Dunlap, the guy we mentioned earlier, I ran into him right after your talk in the lobby, and he said something like, "Don't hate the CMS, hate your agency." Because and maybe that gets to like a people thing on the technology side, that they're not like workflow focused enough or whatever.
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. I agree with Greg's point, actually, and it's kind of it's easy to blame the tech in some ways, and actually, I was thinking just earlier about like the best CMS I've ever worked with, and that was born out of a really close working relationship with the developer who set it up.
Interesting. Yeah.
And also the person managing that project was a content person, with technical skills, as opposed to a technical person with some content skills. So yeah, that kind of, I guess that sort of, Greg's point sort of chimes with that, which is, actually, if you can create those collaborations and have, the technical and the content, collaborate on creating the system, then you end up with something that is definitely better.
Right. And I'm wondering, so, I took a break from the podcast over the Christmas holidays. And one of the things I came up with in that kind of reflection period is that my intent now is to democratize content strategy, because it's still a newish discipline. A lot of people don't understand it. And part of my goal is to help people understand it. It sounds like a really important audience that maybe I should spend more time on is the technicians who are building these CMSs.
I think that was one of the things that I guess I wanted to say about this topic is that, at the moment, the conversation around improving these systems, or, developing new ones, seems to be quite a lot about the technical efficiencies. That's where the focus is. And, I see lots of technical people talking to other technical people, and, technical people getting together for conferences and talking about this stuff. It's obviously, it's on the agenda. But I think that the thing that would be great to see a bit more of, and I'm pretty sure people like Greg actually and his colleague Jeff Eaton are already doing a lot of this, is getting involved in that conversation, and going along to those events, which is
right.
Turning up to DrupalCon or whatever it is, and making sure that as content strategists we're in the room and we're involved in thinking about how we improve these solutions that ultimately we all have to work with them. So yeah, I think that's I'm really on board with that, and I like that democratization.
Well, and I think that's starting to happen. What you just described, I had my last guest in episode 44 was Mike Atherton, also from London, who was over in Seattle. He was here for DrupalCon actually, and, and it was great. But he said only 30 people showed up for his talk, and I'm like, really? You're Mike Atherton? It's like the place should have been packed. So there's still some evangelism to be done in that community. But I wonder, have you thought at all, I spend some time, I've spent a lot of time in the WordPress world, and they're all excited about, headless CMSs and the REST API and React and other JavaScript frameworks, and things like that. And so they, and CSS, and, they just, geek out about layout things and things like that. And I'm like, have you thought about, or have you had any success in getting folks of that mindset excited about content?
Ooh, good question. I think it's a real challenge, and I think that it's something that I'm really keen to do more of, which is one of the reasons why it's great to be talking to you today on the podcast. But yeah, to have some more of those conversations with those people. I think the challenge, particularly for me, is that I would not describe myself as a technical content strategist. I'm much more at the kind of creative, strategic end of content strategy. And so, yeah, there's almost there's kind of some fear for me, I suppose, around going into that environment and, trying to bridge the sort of almost the language divide, right? Because we all have our whether we like it or not, we have our own I don't want to say jargon, but, as content strategists, we never use jargon, obviously. No. But we have our own language that we speak that, that makes sense to us. And, with anything like this, where you're trying to come together with some people who maybe kind of think slightly differently to you or take a different approach, that can be a daunting thing. So yeah, kind of creating some spaces where those conversations can happen, and people on both sides kind of feel comfortable to kind of to show up and to bring their opinions and to work on something together, I think is would be great.
Yeah, I'm all of a sudden wanting to brainstorm with you about, like, for example, like those guys, for all of their, immersion in the technologies and things, they're curious. Most of them are curious, helpful people, who genuinely want to help, and they're just kind of stuck with the same. So I'm just trying to think of, like, how can we have conversations, for example, like conversations about workflow and the authoring experience, because that's you're on the creative end, and that's do you find that you're working like outside of the CMS to be creative? And have you seen ways that, boy, if only my CMS did this, I could just be in here all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do. And I have this whole long list of kind of, like, I guess, attributes and things, it's like, asking myself, like, hold on a minute, like, what is it about Google Docs that makes it, a good place to create content? And how can we translate some of that into, whatever CMS you might be using? I think there is a lot of potential to kind of, absolutely kind of soup up, I guess, so you can soup up your CMS. I think that the challenge is sometimes around kind of the prioritization of that work. I know for a lot of the organizations that I work with, it just gets pushed down the pecking order because they're very focused on delivering for their external users. But building in some kind of workflow capability to their CMS is something that they often struggle to, kind of create a budget line for, say.
Right.
So again, we kind of get into this, like, making the case and why that stuff, there are efficiencies to be made there as well, and why it's important for your content editors to have good tools to work with, and those kinds of things. So that's one side of it. And then I think the other side is there's often, I think, some distance, not always, but kind of distance between content people and technical people. I just, like, actual physical distance, and the example I gave earlier about, my favorite CMS ever, I sat next to the developer who was working on that. He was just, in the seat next to me. And so we were able to just kind of, have these conversations like, oh, this has come up, and how possible is this, and would you be willing to try this for me, in both directions as well. So I kind of, I think that that is something that does really work. So figuring out ways to kind of close that gap, whether it kind of be about actually getting yourself in the same space as the technical people, or just, having more frequent contact. I think that's definitely a way forward.
Right. No, that makes perfect. And that resonates with things that a few other guests on the show have said about that. It's, that if you just spend a little time with people, it's like, oh, that's a concern. I didn't know that. And, and in fact, I think it's kind of common. I don't know how you guys work at Contentious, but a lot of agencies, or some of the more progressive, like, and even back in the late 90s, I was talking to a friend who worked at an old agency called Studio Archetype. Even back then, their teams consisted of technical people, content people, design people, and like client people, all working and sitting at the same desk practically and doing that. And that seems to be the best way to do it. But I think some of this, like, if you're doing client work, there may just be you're not on the site all the time, or if you're in a big enterprise, the IT people are in a whole other building. Maybe is that kind of what you see?
Yeah, right. I mean, there are kind of a multitude of different scenarios and different setups. But I think for me, kind of from my experience, that example of kind of me sitting next to my kind of technical counterpart is the exception rather than the rule. And those things are often a little bit siloed for whatever reason. So I think I see that as being kind of as being one of the issues. And then there's that thing that I kind of touched on earlier, because of the way the internet developed, and because lots of people still see it as being a kind of, this is a technical thing that needs a technical solution, and we need to kind of get technical people in to deliver that. And then what happens is you get into that kind of classic, oh, and yeah, we should probably have some content for this website. So there can also be that kind of the kind of chronological like the sort of the issue with around timings, where it's like the developers have kind of been and gone by the time you arrive, and kind of, they've, the house is already built, and yeah, it turns out that none of the furniture fits in it.
Got it. That's the perfect analogy. And I want to go back to something you said a little bit ago about making the case for it. I had another guest on maybe a year ago, Jared Spool, the UX guru.
Yes.
We were talking about that. And he was talking about, I was asking him, like, in terms of user experience and his, experience in working with content management and similar kinds of systems, he said that 90% of the UX needs to happen at that back end level, like the authoring experience, the administrative experience. That the front end stuff is like, you just kind of adopt best practices, be as creative as you can, and what's appropriate to the content you're delivering. But like, most of the real human work should be on the back end, but it seems like that's not yet the case with a lot of CMSs.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's such an interesting. That's a nice little quote there. I love it. And yeah, I think that is still not happening as much as it should do. And yeah, I think you also see kind of like in the same vein, this thing where a lot of content strategy needs to happen kind of in the back end and early on, in order to end up with a really effective website that's going to deliver for your business and your users. And so there's still this thing around kind of like retrofitting either that stuff that Jared talks about, the kind of the user experience of the kind of the back end, or the sort of the user experience of their content, and that's bad.
Hey, I want to go. So I kind of because I almost feel like this is like kind of a downer talk, almost like we're talking about the runs. But like the implication of your talk at Confab to me was like, you kind of use this great metaphor of like, you got to dump this CMS. It was like kind of the relationship metaphor. And I'm like, so who's your dream boat? What's your dream content management solution look like?
Yeah, I've just been in so many painful relationships with CMSs. But yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, there's a quote from Carrie Hayne and Mike Atherton's book, Designing Connected Content, which I really love, which I think sums it up quite nicely. And it's, you want to build your tool to fit the model, not model your content to fit the tool. And so I think that kind of whichever way you decide to go in terms of the kind of the technical implementation, so like whichever CMS you choose, whether it's a kind of, which one of the big off-the-shelf ones you decide to go with, WordPress or Drupal, or a smaller thing, or Craft CMS, which is one that I'm quite excited about, or completely custom build your own thing, or go for a decoupled system, which is what I was talking about at Confab. I think the important thing is that you start with your content and you build it content first, so that what you end up with is suitable for the stuff that you need it to ultimately communicate, and that you're not kind of shoehorning, trying to shoehorn your content into a system that isn't designed for it. So I think starting with a blank sheet is a great way to go, and doing that in tandem with some, with a really robust content strategy process where, you do have that content model to work from, and you do know kind of what the aims of the site are, and you know who your end users are, you know who your internal users are, you know what their needs are because you've spoken to them. Then you're in a situation where, especially just hypothetically in this scenario, I think we've probably got plenty of budget to create my Dreamboat CMS. Then I guess that would be how I would approach it. So it would be starting with a blank canvas where I can say, okay, this is what I know about my content because I've done the work. This is what I know about my audience because I've done the work. This is what I know about my internal users and what their needs are because I've done the work. And then bringing all those together and, kind of speccing a technical solution that speaks to all of those things, as opposed to, building something that may or may not, it's like, yeah, how do you do that?
Yeah, I'm getting more hopeful now because a lot of the stuff you just talked about are things that we've all kind of felt and viscerally reacted against for a long time, but now we have concrete explanations. Like, for example, a lot of the talk about content first has been at the page level and the need to abandon wireframes, get real content, and then build back from that. But Atherton, the Designing Connected Content book, the domain model in there is kind of at a bigger level. It's like the whole domain of content that you're working with, and kind of overlaying that on the solution that to kind of have that match up with the content management solution you come up with. That, I don't know, that seems like maybe a good leverage point with these developers. Like, hey, here's the domain we're operating in, and you can almost make that generic, like, because there's this sort of just that idea of domains and entities and relationships between them. That's very much like, it comes out of information. They're both information architects, and it comes out of that world, which is familiar to a lot of people in the tech world. So maybe there is some hope.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there definitely is, and there are people out there in our amazing community, like Carrie and Mike, who are, writing books like that, and sharing all this fantastic knowledge and this great thinking. So yeah, and I mean, I always remember Karen McGrane's Content in a Zombie Apocalypse talk from about 5 years ago, where she was like, we need to stop thinking about our content in terms of blobs and start thinking about chunks. And I feel like progress is being made, on that front, kind of just in terms of the kind of we're learning, right? I mean, we're learning, and we're also educating other people, and we're out there advocating for this stuff. And I think that there are kind of things that are happening, and I guess you can see it in some of the kind of the newer technical solutions that are being developed. The kind of that approach, working from a domain model, or thinking about your content in a more modular way, those things I kind of I see them starting to really creep in now, and you've got tools like Gather Content and Contentful that are really prioritizing that kind of the editor experience and creating kind of user-friendly interfaces for people to work in. And you've got kind of CMSs being developed that are really kind of billing themselves as being content first. So yeah, I'm definitely hopeful. I think the thing that for me is one of the really big challenges is that there's all this great progress being made, and there's more progress that can be made, kind of on the technical front, on a practical level, which is great because you do, and people pick things up, and we learn as we do things. But there's still this like kind of attitudinal issue where why is content still so often in organizations kind of considered the poor relation of design and development, maybe, and why kind of do I still have people calling me saying, I hear you are good with words, I'm launching a website in 4 weeks, can you write all the content for it for me? And you just kind of go, I mean, yes, I can help you with that, but why didn't you call me 6 months ago?
Exactly.
So, but I think it's it's a bit of a chicken and an egg thing, because I think that the progress that's being made, the stuff that we are seeing happening, with some of these new systems that are being developed, and with with these books that are being published on the topic, that stuff will have a positive influence. On the cultural stuff. But yeah, I mean, I guess for my liking, that's happening a bit slowly. And that's the thing that's hard to change, because culture is a tricky one.
People is always the challenging stuff. Hey, no, so we're coming up on time, Laura. I want to. I always like to give my guests one last opportunity. Is there anything that we haven't talked about, or anything that's just on your mind about content strategy these days that you'd like to share with my folks?
So I guess the thing that's on my mind is that I mean, I guess related to this, I guess the thing that I said earlier about, really making sure that we as content strategists are advocating for the user experience of creators and editors and managers whenever we can. And so, just kind of continuing to do that work, and also getting more involved in the conversation with technical people, so that we, hopefully, in the future, I can ask that question that I asked at Confab to an audience of content experts, and we'll perhaps see a few more hands going in the air. That's my wish. But I think there's definitely hope.
Okay, yeah. Where is our lovable CMS? I hope it's out there somewhere. So yeah, it's cool. Well, thanks so much, Laura. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, Larry. It's been really great speaking to you again.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.